Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit activeday.com to apply.
I love old movies about newspaper men who talk about their papers as being on a crusade for the public good, for the common man. Cary Grant was Walter Burns in His Girl Friday. That's that kind of part. It's not the most serious version of that character, but he goes on about it a lot too, while also acknowledging, with his tongue-in-cheek throughout the entire film, the cynicism involved in getting sales through sensationalism. Now, if you want a really cynical film about that, it's the Billy Wilder-Kirk Douglas team-up Ace in the Hole. That's later, though, and it's not a comedy. Humphrey Bogart made a couple of films in which he played the kind of crusading newspaper editor who doesn't exist anymore. And you might also check out an Edward G. Robinson film from the early 30s called 5 Star Final, which is better known today, if it's known at all, outside of the odd times that it shows up on Turner Classics, for having an early part for Boris Karloff. But in that film, Edward G., the Scarface guy, what am I saying, the Little Caesar guy, the Key Largo guy, Paul Muni was the Scarface guy. In 5 Star Final, he plays that kind of editor, and then he went on and reprised the occupation, if not the role itself, in a radio series called Big Town. It later jumped to TV and was even adapted as a comic book series by DC that ran 50 issues. Big Town sounded something like this.
From Hollywood, California, the makers of Rinso, America's biggest selling packaged soap, present a thrilling and exciting drama of life in Big Town, starring Edward G. Robinson with Claire Trevor. Folks, if anything deserves the blare of trumpets, it's the new 1940 Rinso. Yes, sirree, in households from coast to coast, there's been excitement aplenty ever since the makers of Rinso added that wonderful new ingredient, the Sud Booster. Rinso now gives richer, creamier suds than ever, and even in the hardest water. And say, wait till you see what a cinch dishwashing can be with the new 1940 Rinso in your dishpan. Great mountains of suds that make it a snap to soap grease and food particles loose in minutes. Then a flick with your dish mop or rinse, and presto, you can dry them clean as clean can be in a twinkling. And don't forget, ladies, the Rinso on all grocery shelves is the new 1940 Rinso in the same familiar box, but with a world of difference in the suds.
I use a transcription program to help me with these episodes sometimes, and it's free, so I can't complain much, but I do enjoy complaining about it nevertheless. And in this instance, I didn't want to have to retype all that ad copy, so I asked the program to listen to this much degraded 85-year-old audio and do the best that it could. I didn't think it was going to be very impressive in its results because I know what it does with brand new audio that I create for you here in 2025, never mind 1938 or whatever that was. It's not AI. I don't think it's accurate to say that it hallucinates. It just guesses based on what it thought it heard. And in this case, at one point, it thought that the announcer said that the ladies will like Rinso not because of its very different suds, but because of its very different touch, which made it sound like sort of an X-rated Mother's Little Helper. And that illusion was only further enhanced when it understood Sud Booster, which I had heard as Sud Buster, to have been Sud Brother. And I laughed pretty hard at Sud Brother, not simply because it suggested that's where the product's newly enhanced touch came from, but because they had missed a trick. Sud Brother is a cartoon mascot like the Jolly Green Giant or Mr. Clean. Boy, those dishes from Thanksgiving really have some caked on grease, Bob, but don't worry because Sud Brother's here. Sud Brother. With the ad out of the way, the announcer shifts to telling you what this episode of Big Town is about, at least a little.
In the dramatic series Big Town, Steve Wilson, managing editor of the Illustrated Press, is played by Edward G. Robinson. Lorelei Kilburn, his society editor, is played by Claire Trevor.
You might remember Claire Trevor from her truly painful Best Supporting Actress part in Edward G. Robinson and Humphrey Bogart's Key Largo, although she had a much longer career than that and helped break John Wayne in Stagecoach. That was the movie that really made him a big star. And there are a bunch of other good ones too. Dark Command, the only John Wayne Roy Rogers team up, and not a double R burger in sight. And if you've seen the rough Babe Ruth story with William Bendix as the Babe, she played Claire, his wife. And may I just point out that the transcription program understood Lorelei Kilburn, his society editor, is played by Claire Trevor, to be more like Kill's unhid society editor is played by Claire Trapper. We need an unhid society editor at Baseball Prospectus. I volunteer for the job. It also heard the character I'm about to introduce to you as Fletcher as Pleasure, which just goes to support my alternative sub-brother with the improved touch narrative for this show. Gee, but you're smiling a lot more than you used to, Lorelei. Why, that's because of the new Rinso, Tom. And then she turns and winks at camera.
Our story opens in one of the underground shafts of the Big Town coal mine. Two workers are riding dump cars loaded with anthracite down the shaft.
Well, those workers immediately plunged to their doom due to shoddy equipment. We now join outraged newspaper editor Steve Wilson, already mid-rant.
Confound it, Fletcher. When I tell you to play up a story, I mean play it up. But I did, Steve. It was worth only 2 sticks, but I gave it a full column. Are you saying 2 men's lives are worth only 2 sticks in the illustrated press? But where's the news value? 2 poor coal miners are dead because the big town coal mining corporations won't spend the cash to make their mines as safe as time and money can make them. Yeah, that's the news value, Fletcher. I've made up my mind, Fletcher, that I'm not going to let another accident in the big town mine get by with a few lines on the inside page.
I've made up my mind, Pleasure. No, the pleasure is all mine. But in any case, this sort of editor doesn't exist anymore, if he ever did, or she, or they. And this is especially true when it comes to ball players, by which we should understand labor. Labor that wants to bargain for pay commensurate with what it's actually worth. Over time, there have been newspapers that had a more or less liberal or conservative slant, and by newspapers I really mean any news organization. Could be TV, could be radio, could be in some other media, including online for sure, and some have been both in their time of existence. The New York Post had a liberal orientation under owner Dorothy Schiff from 1939 through 1976, then Rupert Murdoch came along, and all of that was not only history, but the paper pivoted to be the diametrical opposite of what it had been before. Mostly, though, those organs have done what they can to protect entrenched interest. Dig the editorializing in this February 26, 1927 dispatch from the Associated Press. Babe wants world with fence around it to play ball. Babe Ruth demands a yearly salary of $100,000, a 2-year contract, and a refund of $7,700 held out from his salary in the past before he will play baseball again. It was revealed on his departure for New York tonight. A letter, February 20th, to Colonel Jacob Ruppert, owner of the New York American League team, was made public by Ruth. That's the whole story. World with fence around it. Hints that Ruth was making extraordinary demands to safety-proof his future. That is, to give himself security. These are the same kinds of shots we hear from politicians and pundits when so-called entitlements like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security are on life support in the Congress or via the executive office. We can't child-proof the world for you. No, you can't. But you can make it a hell of a lot less likely to end badly for us with some very light lifting, a little bit of sharing. Babe Ruth, with the help of his second wife Claire, who I just mentioned, and his agent Christy Walsh, did all right in the end, but most ball players of his time hung up their cleats and went to work in a factory or delivered laundry or some such. Not that there's anything wrong with that sort of work, unless, as a result of your athletic career, you have a lot of physical complaints, which of course many of them do. But then so do people who deliver laundry, bring in the crops, and so forth. Even those of us who type as much as, well, I do, end up with carpal tunnel syndrome. But none of that is really the point. It doesn't matter what kind of work you do and how laborious it is physically. It's that, and this seems so obvious as to not need saying, we all have an obligation to ourselves, whether our name is George Herman Ruth or not, to prepare for the future and to set it up as best we can so that when the night comes and we can no longer work, we're not sticking our heads and hands in the garbage can looking for scraps. And obviously, the more you can get while you're in mid-career, the better. No one's going to give it to you afterward. None of us can be under the illusion that we are going to live, as that article had it, in a world with a fence around it, but we have to do the best we can. And the only difference between Babe Ruth and everyone else, whether then or now, is that he had a more obvious argument than they did, because unlike whoever brings in the crops or delivers the laundry or the package from Amazon or what have you, he wasn't replaceable at all. And the Yankees were personally transformed by him from a second-rate franchise into an international brand, and it retains that value to this day. And obviously it was enhanced by the passage of the decades and people like Casey and Mickey and Jolt and Joe and so on, right down to Aaron Judge and the gang today. No one's disputing that, but only one fellow got the ball rolling. And of course, no one could have known as of the 1920s that that would happen. It could have just been a phenomena that came with the Babe and might have left with him as well. I'll say one other thing too, which is judging from the estate that Jacob Ruppert left when he died. The only thing that he had was the Yankees. Prohibition had severely damaged that guy. Don't forget, he had inherited a beer brand, a brewery, from his dad. And it's not like he lived within his means during those 15 years that Prohibition was in force. For one thing, he was too busy being a sugar daddy. When Joe DiMaggio held out for more money, he shamed him in the papers as being a very selfish young man. But the selfish one was Ruppert, who, without the Babe and then subsequently Joe, and Gehrig too, yes, him, would have had to sell his home. And here's the thing, that shouldn't have needed to happen to him either, if it had happened. All human lives have value. I'm now saying something that's fairly controversial according to Nazi philosophy, but I stand by it. Over the course of human history, we've done a great job extending the lives of old people and reducing child mortality, not to mention childbirth mortality. As a species, though, we don't really know what to do with either of them, and we begrudge them a lot. Now, Babe Ruth didn't know whether he'd be retiring at 30 or 35 or 40 as it turned out. Most ball players are gone a lot earlier than that. And so you can hardly blame them, or blame the Babe if you so choose, for trying to make hay while the sun shines. And it was even more of a pointed issue for the Negro Leaguers, who of course made less money for the most part, leaving aside a possible explanation for someone like Satchel Paige, who just barnstormed all year round. I haven't seen anyone approach this systematically, but anecdotally, I would bet that most Negro Leaguers, consistent with long-standing American actuarial tables, went to their reward, stepped onto the golden stair way faster, way sooner, way earlier in life than their white contemporaries did. And of course, you can find exceptions to this. I mean, Lou Gehrig checked out at 38, and Judy Johnson, the Hall of Fame third baseman, lived until he was 89. But more to the point, after his playing career was over, Judy Johnson had jobs like department store security guard and school bus driver. And yeah, as I said, he got into the Hall of Fame in 1975. But as Pete Alexander observed when he got in, you can't live on awards, you also need money. And I'm not saying that every ball player should have it made when they retire or are released, whether at 22 or 25 or 35. Although I hope they all are, given what they make nowadays. But again, not all of them get to that big payday either. So while it's a nice wish to have, it's not a realistic expectation. They didn't in Ruth's day, of course, and most of them don't now. Most of us don't now. But I'm not sure what it is that's so self-indulgent about saying, hey, I'm a worker in and for the United States of America. I make stuff here, and I buy stuff here, or in the case of Babe Ruth, and I sell tickets, and I help make the place go. Less than some, more than others. I'm going to do that as long as I can, but once I'm done, I'd like to enjoy the rest of the ride without having to live on dog food or to check out before my time because I couldn't afford the pills for my cancer. I did what I could while I could, but I'm still here. My family would prefer that I not be euthanized Logan's Run style just because I'm a bit old now. The grandkids still love their pop-pop. I was someone for the United States. I remain someone for the United States, and I would just like to be here and not feel disposable. In other words, he or she or they who looks to the future and does not want to live in a world with a fence, as the Associated Press accused the Babe of wanting, let them throw the first stone, and I'll laugh at them. They're either already so wealthy that they think they won't ever need a thing from anyone, or they're just dumb. Surely it is not selfish to ask for a way to wrap up our lives that doesn't involve, as it did for Judy Johnson, sitting in a department store and hoping no one tried to shoplift, or for that matter, being a Walmart greeter. It would be a far better world that allowed us to live out our declining years away from the point of the gun or the point of the shopping cart in some comfortable place, atop one of the sunlit hills of the infinite inning. Well, hello there and welcome back to the show, Infinite Inning number 337. I am your host, Stephen Goldman. You can call me convivial, just don't call me Sud Brother. If I could have added a Pillsbury Doughboy like chuckle squeak to that, I might have, but I didn't want to try making that sound. I might have alarmed my family or the cat. As it is, they often run down to check on me every time they just hear a vague shout, which is usually me saying, "Hey, Barney!" We could also do that jingle style. Hey, Barney. Shh, don't encourage him. Random current baseball thing I'm finding kind of cool. In the prior segment, I was going to mention some ball players who retired at advanced ages, like Phil Niekro. I ended up not doing that, but I was also thinking of our current quadragenarian hero, Charlie Morton of the Orioles. In Charlie's first 9 appearances this year, he went 0-7 with a 9.38 ERA. And it was very tempting to say, oh, okay, he's had a very fine career for someone who really didn't put it all together until the Astros got hold of him when he was 33. But alas, now it's over. That is true of so many players who are late bloomers. They get to this peak and then it's over really, really fast just because biology kicks in at that point. Somewhere at the end of April or early May, when he was in the midst of this terrible streak, someone asked him if it was indeed over. And his answer was very striking, along the lines of, no, it would seem that way, but I know I still have the ability to do this. And sure, maybe they would all say that in Morton's position, but he seemed so definitive that I believed him. Now, since then, he's pitched 9 games and gone 4-0 with a 2.68 ERA. He's allowed just 2 home runs in 40 1/3 innings. And I find that very encouraging. As Bill James once wrote of Goose Gossage, keep going, Charlie. You're going to be retired a very long time. This week at Baseball Prospectus, I wrote about the huge, by Milwaukee standards, crowd that turned up this week for the Paul Skeens versus Jacob Misiorowski game. In it, I expanded on an idea that I first broached here. I'm not sure if it was in the most recent new episode or one of the reissue episodes during my opening remarks. As you know, and we've done 8 of these now, during each of those episodes, I try to put in somewhere between 10 and 20 new minutes each time. But I began with growing up in a neighborhood that was slightly overpopulated by young psychopaths, and then eventually graduated the story to bad experiences at the ballpark, and yet loving going to the ballpark, and finally arriving on the idea of community. It's called Thank the Lord for the Crowd, and as always, I hope you'll check it out. Before I give way to a break and thenceforth to the second story of our episode, I should check on you too, in a nice way, I mean, because I haven't yet asked you how you're doing here at the end of the Republic. And, you know, that sounds like a negative thing, and for me it is, and possibly to you it is. For many people it may not be. They're getting, in some sense, what they want. I don't exactly understand why they would want it, but they're getting it. I'm really struggling with it, though. Sarah Kendzior, who has written a great deal about the rise of whatever it is that we're living under now, captured my emotional state following this week's 100-degree days and on and off wars and poisonous Supreme Court decisions in an essay at her Substack. I encourage you to read it and to try her books for that matter. A very brief excerpt. She wrote, "If you could have 1 hour, only 1 hour, in the cool, natural air, just 1 hour when things were not wrong, you could make it through the week. You imagine a lemonade stand run by children selling relief to adults, pouring it into paper cups, and a line of adults so long it bests the record-breaking No King's Day rally that everyone forgot after the king announced we were at war. The king has proclaimed we are not at war with Iran anymore because the king won. Shh, keep telling him that. But his backers proclaim we are at war with a nice 33-year-old man who wants to do good deeds and has assembled a massive following. Things don't tend to work out well for fellows like that, especially against the forces backing the king. You take some comfort that this fellow is not a carpenter. If you don't know who she's talking about, I'm not going to specify, but if you do, I will just say that directly after the election in question, I heard the kind of language that was being used around the country to refer to this gentleman, and I turned to my wife and I said, I worry he's a dead man walking. I pray that that is not the case, but I fear that is the kind of times that we are living in, and that is what is really getting to me. I saw a security video today of ICE agents blowing the door off of a private residence belonging to a young couple with young children, and they say they are all American citizens. All my life, I have learned, I have been taught, I have understood that I exist as a result of World War II and the Holocaust. No one ever said that to me explicitly, but it was an easy inference for me to make because both my parents are 100% the result of the rise of Nazi Germany. My father's parents met in Palestine before the State of Israel, having fled Germany and Romania, respectively, prior to the war. My maternal grandfather was run out of France by the invasion of the Nazis in May 1940, fled and joined the Free French Navy, came to these shores on the battleship Richelieu, and met my grandmother, and thus did my mother come into the world. You hear these stories again and again when you're a kid, and you ask, where are the cousins, uncles, aunts, and so on that all my friends seem to have? Where is the great big family that I was born into? And what you get back is they were all murdered. My father would say that his father was smart enough to get out, that his immediate relatives argued with him, said it was just a fad, it was going to be cool. It wasn't cool. You talk to my mom or my maternal grandmother, and you hear them say, well, we used to get letters from the family back in Poland, and then one day the letters just stopped. And it was a very bad day indeed in 1946 when we finally found out that every single one of those people was dead. There are times I try to hold 6 million deaths in my mind, and I think, that's 2 full seasons of attendance, sellout attendance at Dodger Stadium. Have you ever sat in a sold-out ballpark and just tried to absorb the presence of 49,999 other people around you, not counting the hot dog vendors and security guards and ball players and so forth? It's hard. And then at the end of the 9th inning, Shohei Ohtani hits a walk-off home run, and all 50,000 people in the park go into the lot, kneel down, and a bunch of guys in gray uniforms shoots them in the back of the neck one by one. I told myself throughout my life not to be like my assimilated Jewish Berlin relatives and become complacent, and that when danger reared its ugly head, I would know what to do. Well, I'm still here, and I find myself saying, it's only a fad. It'll be cool. And it won't be cool. And when I see doors blowing off the hinges so that parents who haven't done anything at all can be deported to meet a madman's quota, I know that it's as bad as, well, they should have thought it was. And we can protest. We still have that right, but by a Supreme Court decision that came down today as I speak to you, or yesterday, actually, as I speak to you, it's now after midnight in my part of the world, our president received his version of the Nazis' 1933 Enabling Act, which, in the wake of the quote-unquote emergency of the Reichstag fire, transferred all power to the Chancellor's office without reference to any of the checks and balances such as they existed under the Weimar Constitution. Things went rapidly downhill from there for a lot of people. Let's just put it that way. That's why when earlier I said a lot of people are getting something they apparently want, but I don't understand why they want it. I don't get why you would want to invest any one person with that sort of power. It's trite to say that absolute power corrupts absolutely, but man, there's a great example in what was until fairly recently living memory for tons of people. And more to the point, it's not why that person would want it or that it's a bad idea. It's why someone would be seized by the suicidal impulse to grant it to them. Someone, I mean, who doesn't stand to benefit directly. Of course, they think that they do. I struggle with this every single day. I don't know what hill to go climb and hide on. And so we stay. We'll keep telling stories. What else is there to do? If I go off and take to bed for a week or a month or a year, that won't help anyone. So I'll stay here and keep punching. And you keep punching too, okay? On the other side of this break, I'm going to talk a bit about the Hall of Fame outfielder Hack Wilson and murderers named after fruit and also drinking too much. I'm not sure where I'm driving that particular car, not yet, but I hope you'll come along for the ride regardless and we can figure it out together. I'll see you on the other side, okay? Well, I had that whole break to figure it out, and I still don't exactly know where we are driving to, but you trust me, right? Stay with me. We'll end up somewhere useful. We'll start with a man named George Apple of 705 4th Street in Council Bluffs, Iowa, in 1924, 101 years ago. That June, he found himself in court because he drank too much cider. Here is the complete news article from the Daily Nonpareil. Sober on through life. George Apple takes pledge rather than go to jail. George Apple, 705 4th Street, was given an alternative of serving 30 days in jail or keeping sober for the rest of his life when he appeared in municipal court Friday charged with drunkenness. George chose to keep sober. He was given a suspended sentence of 15 days in jail and warned that if he was brought in for drunkenness again, another 15 days would be added to it and the whole sentence enforced. Does blunt force ever work? It rarely suffices in cases of addiction. It is all at once a psychological, neurological, and physical problem. And in most cases, you can't just browbeat someone or shame them or order them in any sense to just give up the thing, the substance that has literally rewired their brain so that they crave it. Although crave is too weak a word, they need it to keep running. A player with a similar problem was in the midst of his rookie year. In 1924, outfielder Hack Wilson was with the New York Giants. He played in 107 games and hit .295 with a .369 on-base percentage, a .486 slugging percentage, and these are fun numbers, so I'm just going to unpack them. 19 doubles, 12 triples, 10 home runs. He was only 24, and it wasn't bad at all, given that manager John McGraw kept him on the bench into June, and then he also suffered a couple of injuries that lost him playing time after that. He began the 1925 season as the starting left fielder, with occasional starts in center, but rapidly went cold, was benched, sent down to Toledo of the American Association, and then, infamously, the Giants didn't pick up his contract, so the Cubs were free to snag him in that fall's Rule 5 draft. The moment he became a star, a lot of explanations were advanced for why the Giants had made the decision that they did. By explanations, I also mean excuses. Maybe it was just a paperwork error. Maybe McGraw had just misjudged the player, which certainly he was not immune to at that time. But no one has ever said, and there's no way of knowing either way, but it just seems very plausible to me, that Wilson already at that age had a problem that McGraw did not think he wanted to deal with or could deal with. Don't forget, this was 2 years after a player we've talked about a lot, Shufflin' Phil Douglas, was exiled from baseball as the result, the indirect and direct result of his alcoholism. And at that point, McGraw swore off trying to straighten out those kinds of players, something he had routinely attempted going back at least 25 years. He said players like Douglas and Bugs Raymond before him had taken years off his life, and he just wasn't going to do that anymore. There's no way of knowing whether he made that sort of decision about Hack Wilson, but there's no way of ruling it out either. The Cubs' acquisition of Hack was promoted by incoming manager Joe McCarthy, who was coming up from Louisville. He had seen Hack playing for Toledo during his minor league exile and was impressed, and he thought he could handle him too. Now, it's worth backtracking for a sec for anyone who missed the first lecture. Do you ever have that nightmare? My high school, college, and fleeting grad school days are well behind me now, and yet every once in a while I still dream that I missed class. Last night, in fact, I dreamed I'd been dropped into a math class for a test on material I had never seen before. I looked down at the exam paper, and it was just a scrawl of formulae that might as well have been Sanskrit. This happened to me in real life in a way in my senior year of high school, and I kind of regret this, but what I chose to do when I realized I wasn't having any fun was say, I've taken enough math to graduate, right? Great, I'm leaving. And I left. So in real life, I was less afraid than I turned out to be in my nightmares. It's very odd. Hack was also odd, one of the strangest great ball players of all time. His real name, by the way, was Lewis. He picked up the Hack nickname via a pro wrestler named George Hackenschmidt, who had a similar stature. It's very hard to believe that human breeding produced two such specimens, but if you look at pictures, well, there you go. Hack was born in 1900 in the small steel town of Elwood City, Pennsylvania. Today, it's about an hour's drive northwest of Pittsburgh via the interstate. Hack was an illegitimate child, the product of a 20-something father and a 15 or 16-year-old girl. Hack seems to have been bounced between his mother, who died when he was about 7, his itinerant dad, and a series of not really foster families, actually pseudo-moms who happened to run the boarding houses in which he found himself living. When Hack was the same age his mom was when she gave birth to him, as I said, he quit school and took a variety of sledgehammer-swinging type jobs in the mills. Whenever he could, he played baseball and was good enough to jump from the sandlots to semi-pro leagues and from there to the professional Mountainsburg Martineers of the Blue Ridge League. That began his path to the majors. He hit a lot, and he had to because, and there's no nice way to say this, he looked like a troll. There's no use being coy about it. Everyone knew it, he knew it too, and it hurt him, but it just happened to be the case. It wasn't just that he was short, it was his proportions were strange and doll-like and simultaneously a little bit grotesque. I've commented often here that there is a picture of him next to Ruth and Gehrig, in which the two Yankees look like they're posed with an escapee from The Wizard of Oz. I've dropped that in the Facebook group, by the way. Yes, there's still a Facebook group. I've always said that Hack looked like an inverted bowling pin. He was big on the top and small on the bottom, with miniature hands and feet. In a piece written after Hack's passing, Arthur Daly, the New York Times columnist, said he was built like two men sitting down. He was only 5'6", but weighed over 200 pounds. Now, he wasn't fat. Well, he wasn't in his prime. If you look at him during his late career years with the Dodgers, he was very much out of shape. He was out of shape in every way that you can name, with both his condition gone and his drinking becoming increasingly problematic. Casey Stengel, who managed him for about half a season with the Dodgers before reaching the sadly correct conclusion that he was washed up, looked up early in spring training, saw a tanker truck, a milk truck in fact, rolling past the ballpark and said, "Oh look, Hack is reporting at last." He also said, "We may not hit much, but we can outdrink any team in the league." Pictures of Hack at that time make Babe Ruth, who was reaching the end of his career at almost the exact same moment, look trim. Wilson biographer Clifton Blue Parker notes that, despite his muscularity, sports writers commonly referred to him throughout his career as the chunky one, the pudgy one, and even the fat boy. I'd be interested to see those remarks dated because, as I just observed, Hack started out in good shape, but swelled in proportion to his lack of commitment. He put on weight as the result of beer, which, as Benjamin Franklin once pointed out, is just liquid bread, dummy. But Thomas Scott, the author of Hack's Saber bio, says his odd physique was also the result of fetal alcohol syndrome. That matches the fact of Hack's parentage. Both mom and dad pounded back more than their share. But unless Hack has been exhumed somewhere and somehow tested for something that would have affected him in infancy, I'm not sure how we know that. It's just an inference, perhaps, but a very plausible one. What we do know is that Hack also had way too much of the grape or the hops or the barley or probably anything else available. And during Prohibition, he was very fortunate that it wasn't denatured alcohol, which temperance dickheads planted among the good stuff to murder people who weren't abstemious enough for their tastes during the reign of the 18th Amendment. I don't know if he picked up his tastes in vitro or just as part of his American life at the beginning of the 20th century, but it crippled him in a lot of ways and eventually ended things early. You know, he had started as a catcher and ended up in center field, and I just don't know. I mean, he famously made a bad error in one of the World Series in which he played because he was on these very good Cubs teams, It just seems like everything should have been over his head. But in any case, he played center, and during his 5-year peak, that's really all it was that puts him in the Hall of Fame. That and his single season of 1930, which we'll get to in a second. Between 1926 and 1930, he hit .332 with a .419 on base percentage and a .612 slugging percentage, hitting 177 home runs. Famously, in 1930, when he was 30, he played in every game. He hit .356, .454 with a league-leading .723 slugging percentage. He also walked 105 times. He hit 56 home runs and drove in 191 runs. Some of that was the greatness of Hack at that moment. Some of it was the insane rabbit ball that was in use in baseball that year. That said, how many players in the National League hit 56 homers and drove in 191 runs? Just the one. Some of this he had in common with George Apple of Council Bluffs, and much of it he did not. I want to tell you why I was looking at George Apple, spelled like the fruit, A-P-P-L-E, and I'll do that right after we take a second and final break for this episode. So this whole segment came about as the result of kind of a bit of serendipity. I was flipping stations on satellite radio, and I came across a smidgen of a John Oliver stand-up routine about someone named George Apple. Now, I already had Hack Wilson. I knew, before I knew why, that I was going to talk to you about Hack this week. Now, sometimes I have that intuition, and I turn out to be wrong. And there are piles and piles of kind of aborted episode notes that I have where I thought that a certain subject was going to pay off in something that was worth telling you about, and I turned out to be wrong and had to figure something else out. That's just part of writing. You start whole books sometimes, and then you say, yeah, no, that was a mistake. I try not to do that. Oliver was doing a bit, a true story about a man who was put to death by the state of New York at Sing Sing on, as it turns out, August 9th, 1928. As Casey Stengel said, you could look it up, and I know, because I did. I ended up looking at the wrong guy in the wrong year, and the reason is that the man that Oliver was referring to apparently pronounced his last name Apple, but he spelled it A-P-P-E-L. Now, I've known people by that surname, and they pronounced it Appel, emphasis on the second syllable. Once I wound up with George Apple of Council Bluffs, Iowa in 1924, instead of George Apple spells it Appel in New York in 1928, I started working at things from a different direction and figured out who I was really supposed to be talking about. George Apple had murdered Police Lieutenant Charles Kemmer in December 1927 in Glendale, Queens, during a robbery of a restaurant. I don't know very much about Glendale except that Jackie Robinson is buried there. Appel was 40. Excuse me, Apple. I'm sorry, Mr. Appel, wherever you are. Apple was 40. He and a partner named Edward Byrne robbed, as I said, a restaurant. Lieutenant Kemmer, who had 2 young kids, came on the scene while the robbery was still in progress. Before he could draw his gun, one of the 2 robbers knocked him down with a punch to the jaw, and the other shot him 3 times, fatally wounded him. They got away with $89 and a diamond stick pin. Apple was subsequently revealed to be an escaped robber of a jewelry store in Chicago, where he was known as Oppenheimer. At trial, Byrne, who was only 24 years old and had a family pleading on his behalf, as opposed to Apple, who apparently had no one, flipped on Apple and pegged him as the shooter. Witnesses from the restaurant agreed that they saw a gun in Apple's hand, but never in Byrne's, although no one actually saw what had happened. Even Byrne said that he was already in the getaway car at the time that Apple shot the police officer. The jury found Apple guilty of murder in the first degree, while Byrne got to plead down to second-degree murder, robbery, grand larceny, and assault after the jury deadlocked on the first-degree murder charge where he was concerned. At sentencing, he was given 35 years to life. Apple got the chair. And the whole reason that John Oliver was riffing on this murderer from 1927 was that when Apple went to the chair, as they were bringing him in, according to John Oliver, he said, "Well, fellas, you're about to see a baked apple." The version I found in the newspapers of the time was, "Well, I'll be a baked apple soon." Either way, that's impressive sang-froid, and I think Oliver is close enough. New York killed 2 other men that night, same chair, but no one remembers them because they didn't do any material before they went. I think that was kind of John Oliver's point. So that's why I found the other George Apple, who in turn reminded me of Hack and something Joe McCarthy tried to gently punish him with when his drinking got out of hand early in their relationship. I found it futile to try to track down exactly when this story happened. It's been repeated in a number of places over the years. Some of them kind of loosely specify dates and times and places. Most of them don't. It would have happened between 1926 and, well, almost all of the 1930 season, at which point McCarthy was forced out by Rogers Hornsby, and it involves a 3-home-run game. Now, that narrows things down considerably in that Wilson only did that once in Philadelphia at the Baker Bowl, of course, on July 26, 1930, and parenthetically, he hit them off of Clyde Willoughby and Phil Collins, not that Phil Collins. Willoughby was not a particularly good pitcher, kind of the opposite, really, but who knows what he might have been had he not been born a Philly of that time. The same also goes for Phil Collins, who wasn't a great pitcher either, but got close enough to quality that you could imagine him being sort of a league average arm with the Giants or Cardinals defenses behind him. Trivia time, who led the National League in saves in 1933? Phil Collins with 6, not that anyone knew that at the time. When saves became a thing, Phil had nothing on his mind, been in a box all the time for about 20 years, Studio. The Philadelphia Inquirer headline for that game is classic. Hack Wilson clips 3 home runs as Phillies surrender. Cubs claw Phils into meek submission during heatwave battle. Another subhead read, hacked to death. You ever see a story in the news that cites a statistic like attacks on left-handed dentists are up 49% over last year? So clearly left-handed dentists need protection from the worst members of our society. But they never say that last year, in a nation of 330 million people, there were just 3 attacks on left-handed dentists, probably just coincidental to the fact that they were portside tooth pullers, and that a 49% increase means that this year there were 4 such attacks. I'm not dismissing the suffering of any of those Southpaw Cavity commandos, just the practice of ginning up fear based on selective quotation. In that sense, given how small the Baker Bowl was, I'm not sure how to interpret this bit from the story of Hack's final home run. Willoughby suffered the humiliation of the final burst, a long drive which carried almost to the tall brick chimney on the Reading tracks. The railroad tracks, the Baker Bowl was essentially across the street from a railroad yard and, if I remember correctly, was sort of humped because there were tunnels that passed beneath it. Hack, who was a right-handed hitter, liked to let the ball travel in and go to the opposite field a lot. That's how he got his high batting averages. So far that scans. On the other hand, it was only 280 feet to right field and 300 to right center. So sure, maybe the ball went a long way out of a small stadium, but would that mean that today it went to like the second row of the left field stands at Dodger Stadium and we'd all kind of yawn? I posted a picture of the ballpark and its relationship to the railroad yards on the Facebook or in the Facebook group, and you'll note just how far it was to that smokestack. The ball had to cross a divided avenue that looks about the width of New York's similarly divided Park Avenue, then get across a wide sidewalk to get near the actual railroad facility. It looks like a huge shot, but maybe it wasn't. An imprecise measurement based on that photograph suggests that the shot was somewhere between 400 and 450 feet, and that's legitimately big. Now, if you get after it with some calipers, you might come up with a more accurate measurement than my one-eyed eyeballing. As much as I've talked about that game, which was part of Hack building a winning case for the MVP award that year, it wasn't the game in question. So it was probably during an exhibition game in Los Angeles, perhaps in 1926 or 1927. The Cubs used to train on Catalina Island because owner William Wrigley owned Catalina Island too. I'd like to own an island. I would not develop it. I promise. It would just be my nature preserve. I'd just go, hang out with the ducks, catch bird flu, and probably expire. Anyway, unlike a lot of managers who raged helplessly at alcoholics, McCarthy was, how do I put this, more sober about it. Maybe that was because he was a heavy drinker himself, although he mostly managed it. I don't mean that as a pun either. He did. He was able to manage himself. On the other hand, he did miss the odd game with it. Maybe he was just a gentler person in general. Late in his long run with the Yankees, he blew up at pitcher Joe Page for doing too much partying and promptly quit, as if realizing at that moment he had reached the point of obsolescence, he had become a parody of himself, and he just said, "I'm out of here." In the aforementioned biography of Hack, there is a fantastic quote from Joe McCarthy. He said, "Hack was a much misunderstood man. He needed someone to hold him by the hand. His background was meager. I'm afraid the public jumps at conclusions and decisions too fast and pays too little attention to the handicaps which some of our players had to overcome as youngsters. If you come out of a coal mine into the sunlight, your psychology is not likely to match at once that of the youngster who went from a good home into college and then into the major leagues." That was very perspicacious and very human, and helps explain how McCarthy was able to manage so well for so long. Hack loved him even as Joe attempted to discipline him. And here's another great perceptive thing McCarthy said about that. What could a manager say to such a loyal player who had a weakness he couldn't handle? Now, you can find similar stories to what McCarthy did to Hack during this spring training game, being told about other manager-player conflicts over drinking. Casey Stengel, for example, did this to Mickey Mantle at least once. The story goes like this. McCarthy was a good Catholic boy, and one Sunday morning during spring training in Los Angeles, before the Cubs were to play, he got up early to go to church. As he went out, he saw Hack coming in. Obviously, he had been out all night, and he was clearly not in very good shape. It turned out to be a hot day. The Cubs played the game, and as is typical during spring training, McCarthy subbed out his regulars, subbed them all out, but not Hack. He left him out there to run around in the heat. And yet, though Hack was dragging, he also did the one thing he was good at doing in life. He hit. As I've already indicated, he socked 3 home runs. After the third one, McCarthy gave in, saying, "Maybe you'd better quit now, Hack. Otherwise, you'll never have the strength to go out riding again tonight." Now, I haven't found Hack's 3-homer spring training binge, but let's stipulate that this or something like it happened, unlike some other Wilson-McCarthy interactions in which the latter tried to get the former to take the cure. Some of those are just old vaudeville routines with real people or Cubs subbed in. Did it work? We know it didn't. Hack died in Baltimore in November 1948, about 5 months short of his 49th year, and his innards were shot because of his lifelong addiction. There were other causes, of course, to his downfall. There always are. The Cubs replaced McCarthy's gentle guidance with Rogers Hornsby's abuse, and that just drove Hack deeper into the bottle. And I was going to say that in the end, though, it was down to Hack. Even he said it was at the very end of his life. Courageously said, essentially, what Mickey Mantle said, "Kids don't be like me." Thinking about it, though, I know that it isn't true. The truth is, Hack never had a chance. In the interest of not hitting you over the head with things, I will not detail the off-roads we offer to both children and adults now, for the moment, less so every day, that Hack could not access. The only thing I'm not sure of in this whole story is how things worked out for George Apple of Council Bluffs. I hope he was okay. I hope he was able to quit. Do you suppose that he did? As I've been saying at the end of virtually every other episode lately, we are living in the world that cried wolf. These are the stories of my soul. If you would like to access the stories of my social media, please follow me at stephengolden.bsky.social. You can also write us, by which I mean me, at infiniteinning@gmail.com. And yes, there's a Tired Juan old Facebook group in which I put about 3 or 4 pictures for this episode. Simply go to Facebook, search on Infinite Inning, and as my old Italian barber used to say, bingo bango, you are there. Should you wish to support the show, and I very much hope you do, please visit patreon.com/theinfiniteinning. Gear of a rudimentary kind available at the-infinite-inning.creator-spring.com. Original soundtrack available gratis at casualobservermusic.bandcamp.com. Finally, should you find yourself with the proverbial moment to spare, Please go to the podcatcher of your choice and rate, review, and subscribe. It helps the show gain attention. And if your podcatcher doesn't let you do those things, cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war, and then say that you didn't. Our theme song, which you are hearing now and have been listening to throughout the episode, was a co-composition of myself and Dr. Rick Mooring, who says, "I only have this to tell you after that episode," said brother. Well, if you thought you were going to get out without hearing that one more time, then you probably won't be surprised if I'm back next week with more tales from inside the infinite inning.